3:47 a.m., Opa-locka Executive Airport, Miami-Dade County, Florida. A Gulfstream G65, O taxied toward Hangar 7, tail number N847CR, registered to Crown Sky Charter LLC of Fort Lauderdale. Insurance valid. Flight plan filed for Cabo San Lucas. Manifest listed 2 passengers and standard catering. The hangar door rolled open 6 inches at a time. Inside, 14 federal agents waited in tactical formation. HSI primary. DEA support. FAA inspectors holding aircraft seizure paperwork. The Gulfstream's pilot saw the muzzles before he saw the badges. Hands on the yoke. Don't touch the throttle. The aircraft was empty of passengers. The cabin floor had been pulled up. Beneath the carbon fiber decking sat 84 shrink-wrapped bricks of United States currency. $100 bills, vacuum-sealed in industrial plastic, stacked between the avionics bay and the rear baggage compartment. Total weight on board, 1,847 pounds of cash. Estimated value, $9.2 million. This was the first of 9 aircraft seized that morning across 3 states. By 9 a.m., federal investigators had recovered $88 million in currency from hidden fuselage compartments, stretching from Fort Lauderdale to McAllen. The operation had a name, Clear Sky. It had been running for 19 months. The man who built the case from inside the network had spent 612 days convincing professional smugglers, corrupt mechanics, and 2 cartel money brokers that he was one of them. His cover was so deep that local police in South Texas had twice tried to open their own investigation against him. They believed he was dirty. They were nearly right about everything except the badge in his safe. What follows is the reconstruction of how Homeland Security investigations infiltrated a private jet charter ring that moved $880 million in cartel proceeds across 112 flights. And why 9 aircraft worth a combined $312 million now sit in a federal impound yard in Tucson. October 14th, 2024. McAllen, Texas, a small executive airport 90 miles north of the Mexican border. Special Agent Daniel Reyes signed his name as Daniel Reyna on a 10-month employment contract. Position: Assistant Ramp Manager at the Fixed Base Operator. The FBO handled fueling, hangar leasing, ground handling, and customs coordination for private aircraft. 90% of its traffic was legitimate. The other 10% was what brought HSI to that particular tarmac. Reyna's cover identity was thorough. 10 years of fabricated employment history at 3 different general aviation companies in Arizona and Nevada. A bankruptcy filing from 2019. A DUI from 2021. A divorce decree from 2022 listing custody disputes and unpaid child support. 2 open civil judgments against him in Clark County. On paper, Daniel Reyna was a man with debts, grievances, and a willingness to listen to offers. He didn't get an offer for 104 days. I spent hours going through the unsealed declarations, and one detail kept nagging me. Reyna's case officer logged every shift he worked during that first stretch. Most entries read the same: refueled aircraft, coordinated catering, handled customs, no contact. The agent was washing down citation jets at 2 a.m. in a 40-mile-an-hour wind off the Gulf, and the case file from those weeks fits on a single page. That's the part of undercover work nobody dramatizes. The boredom is the cover. The first opening came on January 27, 2025. A pilot named Anthony Vargas approached him near Hangar 4. Vargas flew for a Fort Lauderdale brokerage called Apex Skyway Charters. He needed a fuel discrepancy report adjusted. The aircraft had departed with 1,100 gallons more than the flight plan accounted for. Vargas wanted the paperwork to match the manifest, not the reality. He offered Reyna $2,000 in cash. Reyna took it. That single transaction opened the door. Within 60 days, Reyna was being asked to falsify customs declarations for 2 more aircraft. Within 90 days, he was introduced to an Apex Skyway dispatcher named Lorena Castillo. Castillo ran the network's logistics. She built the flight plans, paired aircraft to crews and laundered destinations through a chain of FBO partners across Florida, Texas, and the Yucatan. By April 2025, Reyna had been added to the network's encrypted messaging channel. The platform was Wicker Pro, configured for self-deletion every 4 hours. The channel had 11 members. Reyna was the only one of them carrying a federal badge. Apex Skyway charters operated from a 12,000 square foot facility at Fort Lauderdale Executive Airport. The website featured client testimonials from a former NBA player, 2 Gulf region oil executives, and a Forbes-listed CEO. None of those people had ever chartered an aircraft from the company. The testimonials were fabricated. The headshots were stock photos. The Forbes profile linked from the homepage led to a parked domain registered through a Panamanian privacy service. The brokerage was not, in the strictest sense, a fake company. It held an FAA Part 135 air carrier certificate. It maintained valid insurance through a syndicate at Lloyd's. Its 3 Gulfstream G650s, 2 Bombardier Global 6000s, and 4 Cessna Citation Latitudes were all properly registered, properly maintained, and flown by licensed commercial pilots with thousands of hours each. Roughly 30% of Apex's flights were legitimate. Wedding parties to Cabo, business executives to Houston, bachelorette charters to Las Vegas. Those flights were profitable, properly documented, and entirely above board. The other 70% moved cash. Here's the part that doesn't make sense on the surface. The cartel could have used trucks. Trucks are cheaper. Trucks are deniable. A Gulfstream burns 400 gallons of jet fuel per hour and costs roughly $9,000 an operating hour, even before pilot fees and hangar costs. On paper, moving cash by private jet is the most expensive option available. In practice, it was the only one that worked at scale. A standard tractor-trailer crossing back into Mexico through Laredo or Nogales has a 1 in 11 chance of secondary inspection. A Gulfstream G650 filing a flight plan from Fort Lauderdale to Cozumel under Part 135 charter rules has a 1 in 400 chance of customs ramp inspection on the U.S. side, and effectively 0 on the Mexican side if the aircraft has filed a slot at one of 9 private airfields owned or leased by intermediaries. The math worked. One Gulfstream flight could move $12 million. The same value would require 147 duffel bags hidden across 40 trucks. The brokerage was charging the cartel 12% of cargo value per flight. On a $12 million load, that was $1.5 million in fees, of which $40,000 went to each pilot, $60,000 to dispatchers, and the remainder distributed across mechanics, FBO insiders, and the brokerage owners. The ownership of Apex Skyway was layered through 3 Wyoming LLCs into a holding company in the British Virgin Islands. The beneficial owner, federal investigators would eventually establish, was a man named Reynaldo Flor Salazar, a 58-year-old Honduran national who had not personally set foot in the United States since 2018. He ran the network by satellite phone from a residence outside Tegucigalpa. May 2025. Reyna was promoted, not at the FBO by the network. Castillo invited him to Fort Lauderdale for what she described as a logistics meeting. HSI nearly pulled him out. The trip required Reyna to leave his familiar territory, travel under his cover identity, and submit to whatever vetting Apex Skyway used for new operators. His handling team estimated a 30% chance of being made. The trip went forward. Reyna flew commercial from McAllen to Fort Lauderdale on May 19. He was met at the terminal by a man who introduced himself as Marco. Marco drove him to a steakhouse in Boca Raton. 2 other men were already at the table. One of them spent the entire 90-minute meal saying nothing while watching Reyna's hands. The questions came in fragments between courses. Where had he worked before McAllen? Who had vouched for him with the FBO? Whether he had any family? Whether anyone would notice if he disappeared for a week? Whether he had ever spoken to federal agents about anything? Ever, even traffic stops. Reyna answered every question with details that had been built into his cover for 3 years. The bankruptcy, the custody fight, the unpaid debts, the grievances against a former employer in Las Vegas who had fired him for skimming fuel. The story held because it had been built to hold against exactly this kind of meal. The man who hadn't spoken finally did. He told Reyna there would be a flight on June 4th. The aircraft would arrive at McAllen at 2 a.m. Reyna's job was to clear customs paperwork, make sure the customs officer on duty was the one Apex had been paying for 8 months, and load 4 duffel bags into the rear baggage compartment without inventorying them. For this, Reyna would receive $18,000 in cash, delivered the next morning. He agreed. He spent the drive back to the airport convinced he had been compromised. He hadn't. The dinner had been the test. He passed. What strikes me about this case is how mundane the corruption became at its operational layer. Reyna would later describe the network not as a criminal enterprise in the cinematic sense, but as a logistics company with a tolerance for one specific cargo. The dispatchers worked normal hours. The pilots had families. The mechanics complained about overtime. The dirty money was processed with the same spreadsheets as the clean money. Once you stopped looking at what was inside the duffel bags, the operation looked exactly like every other charter brokerage in Fort Lauderdale. That's the part that should disturb people. The infrastructure that moved $880 million in cartel cash was not a shadow network. It was a real charter brokerage that had simply added one product line. June 4th, 2025, 2:14 a.m., McAllen Executive Airport, the Gulfstream G650 with tail number N612. AS landed in light rain. Reyna met the aircraft at Hangar 3. The customs officer on duty was named Eduardo Beltran. Beltran had been on Apex Skyway's payroll since October 2023, receiving $4,000 per cleared flight. He stamped the manifest without leaving the operations office. 4 black duffel bags were transferred from a Ford Expedition parked beside the hangar. Reyna loaded them himself. He didn't open them. The weight told him what he needed to know. Each bag carried roughly 70 pounds. The 4 bags together represented approximately $11.4 million in $100 bills. The Gulfstream departed at 3:48 a.m. with a flight plan filed for Tampico, Mexico. Its actual destination was a private airstrip outside Guadalajara. Beltran stamped the export manifest. The aircraft was in Mexican airspace 11 minutes after takeoff. Reyna received $18,000 in cash the next afternoon, delivered by Marco at a Whataburger parking lot off Interstate 2. He logged every serial number. The bills were tracked back to a series of cash deposits made at 3 different Miami area banks during the previous week. Each deposit had been just under the $10,000 reporting threshold. There were 147 deposits in total, made by 23 different individuals, none of whom had any apparent connection to one another. That deposit pattern was the first thread that led HSI's financial unit to a structuring operation involving a chain of 41 currency exchange shops across South Florida. By August 2025, Reyna had been present for the loading of 7 flights. By October, 11. The intelligence flowing back to HSI Miami had identified 28 individuals across the network's operational tier. The investigative file had grown to 4,700 pages. 2 more undercover agents had been inserted in supporting roles, one as a fueling truck operator at Fort Lauderdale Executive, one as a freelance avionics technician based in Opa-locka. Then, on November 9th, 2025, the operation nearly collapsed. The McAllen Police Department's Narcotics Division opened a parallel investigation. Their target, Daniel Reyna. They had been watching the FBO for unrelated reasons and had observed 3 separate cash handoffs between Reyna and known Apex Skyway personnel. They had photographs. They had a confidential informant inside the FBO maintenance crew. They had drafted a search warrant for Reyna's residence and were preparing to execute it within 72 hours. HSI learned about the McAllen PD operation through a routine data sharing query that flagged Reyna's cover identity in a state law enforcement database. The discovery triggered an emergency coordination call at 1 a.m. on November 10th. 3 federal supervisors, 2 assistant U.S. attorneys, and the McAllen police chief were on the line. The decision was made to extract Reyna immediately and brief the McAllen department on the existence of clear sky. That's when the second problem appeared. If Reyna was extracted, his absence would be noticed by the network within 48 hours. The operation would have to be either accelerated or abandoned. The investigative team had identified the network's leadership, but had not yet documented the full chain of beneficial ownership running through the British Virgin Islands. Pulling Reyna meant prosecuting 28 operators while the men at the top kept their distance. The decision was made to accelerate. Clear Sky moved from intelligence collection to takedown phase on November 14, 2025. The operational timeline was compressed from the original 6-month plan to 10 weeks. 11 federal agencies were briefed and integrated. Sealed indictments were prepared in the Southern District of Florida, the Southern District of Texas, and the Southern District of California. Aircraft seizure paperwork was drafted for all 12 aircraft believed to be on the network's roster, plus 4 additional aircraft owned by associated brokerages. I dug through the post-operation timeline, and what's most surprising isn't the takedown itself. It's that Reyna stayed undercover for another 71 days while the takedown was being built around him. Every flight he handled in that window was a flight federal agents already knew was carrying cash. They watched $11 million cross into Mexico on December 18th. They watched another $14 million on January 4th. The cash was lost on purpose because the alternative was tipping the network too soon. That's a deliberate choice federal investigators rarely talk about publicly. To make the case, you sometimes have to let the crime happen. Here's the take that'll probably get us flack. The decision to let $25 million of cartel money cross the border in order to preserve the integrity of an investigation is defensible operationally, but it deserves more public scrutiny than it gets. Federal agencies treat those losses as the cost of building a prosecutable case. The communities on the receiving end of that money never get a vote in that calculation. Clear Sky will be remembered as a successful operation. It was. It was also a 60-day window in which agents watched cash flow and decided not to interrupt it. That's not criticism of the agents. They followed the playbook. The question is whether the playbook is the right one. What would you have done if you were running Clear Sky on November 14th? Pull the plug and prosecute what you had? Or let the cash keep flowing for another 71 days to indict the people at the top? Drop your call in the comments. I'd genuinely like to read them. The takedown began at 3 a.m. Eastern on January 23, 2026. Operation Clear Sky Final involved 147 federal agents across 9 cities. HSI-led DEA, ATF, FAA, FBI, CBP, IRSCI, U.S. Marshals, the Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control, and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement supported. 7 aircraft were seized on the ground at hangars in Fort Lauderdale, Opelika, McAllen, and Brownsville. 2 additional aircraft were intercepted in flight. The first in-flight intercept involved a Gulfstream G650 with tail number N228SK. The aircraft had departed Fort Lauderdale Executive at 2:11 a.m. with a filed flight plan for Cancun. At 3:14 a.m., while crossing into Florida airspace south of Naples, the aircraft was contacted by air traffic control and instructed to divert to Tampa International Airport for an emergency inspection. The pilots complied. They had no choice. 2 Coast Guard MH-65 helicopters were already shadowing the aircraft. 2 F-16S from Tyndall Air Force Base were holding 50 miles to the west. The aircraft landed at Tampa at 3:47 a.m. Federal agents boarded within 90 seconds. The cargo, $14.7 million in shrink-wrapped currency, hidden in a custom compartment beneath the cabin floor. The 2 pilots, both former regional airline captains with combined 31,000 flight hours, were arrested without incident. One of them was crying when they put him in the transport van. The other had not spoken since the diversion order came through. The second in-flight intercept was more difficult. A Bombardier Global 6000 with tail number N940FX departed McAllen at 2:43 a.m. Flight plan, Toluca, Mexico. The aircraft did not respond to the diversion order. It crossed into Mexican airspace at 3:09 a.m. and continued toward its destination. CBP requested cooperation from the Mexican Federal Aviation Agency. Mexican federal police met the aircraft on the ground in Toluca, acting on a mutual legal assistance treaty request. $11 million was recovered from the airframe. Both pilots were taken into Mexican custody and are currently in extradition proceedings. Across the night, federal agents arrested 43 individuals. 26 were operational personnel: pilots, dispatchers, mechanics, FBO insiders, and customs officers. 11 were brokerage executives, including Apex Skyway's chief operating officer, who was arrested at her home in Coral Gables, and reportedly offered to cooperate within the first hour of interrogation. 6 were bankers and financial intermediaries. Reynaldo Flor Salazar, the network's beneficial owner, was not arrested. He had departed to Tegucigalpa for an unknown destination on January 21, 2026, 2 days before the takedown. He has not been located. His last confirmed sighting placed him at a private residence near the Atlantic coast of Nicaragua. The Department of Justice has filed a sealed indictment against him in the Southern District of Florida, charging 23 counts including continuing criminal enterprise, money laundering conspiracy, and bulk cash smuggling. A $2 million reward has been authorized. The second man at that Boca Raton dinner, the one who hadn't spoken, has not been identified. $97 million in currency was recovered across the operation. Federal investigators estimate the total laundered through the network at $880 million across the 19 months of Clear Sky's surveillance window. The remaining $783 million is gone. Most of it is presumed to have been integrated into legitimate commerce in Mexico, Cayman Islands, and Panama. Some of it has been traced to real estate purchases in Houston, Atlanta, and Miami. Most of it will never be recovered. Apex Skyway Charters surrendered its FAA Part 135 certificate on February 4, 2026. Its physical assets are pending forfeiture. The Lloyd's syndicate that insured its fleet has filed a civil suit alleging fraudulent inducement. Special Agent Daniel Reyes returned to his actual identity on January 23, 2026, at approximately 4:30 a.m., when his supervisor met him in the hangar at McAllen. He had been Daniel Reyna for 612 days. He was reassigned to a desk position in San Antonio. The McAllen Police Department was briefed on November 11, 2025, and the parallel investigation was closed. Their internal report described Reyes's cover as the most convincing they had ever encountered. Eduardo Beltran, the customs officer who had stamped manifests for 15 months, pleaded guilty on March 14, 2026, to bulk cash smuggling and accepting bribes. His sentencing is scheduled for June. He faces up to 20 years. The pilot from the first hangar at Opalaca, the one who was crying in the transport van, signed a cooperation agreement on January 30th. He has provided the names of 4 other pilots not yet charged. Those investigations are open. The network is dismantled. The aircraft are grounded. The man at the top is gone. The demand that built the route is unchanged. Somewhere over the Gulf of Mexico tonight, another aircraft is flying a route that nobody is yet watching. That's not pessimism. That's the math of $880 million split across 4 years of operation. The number that replaces it is already in the air.